As air pollution in Mexico City reached crisis levels in the early 1990s, government authorities responded with an aggressive anti-pollution policy, taking several major steps to reduce pollution from motor vehicle traffic. The first was to clean the fuel, convincing the state oil monopoly, Pemex, to phase out leaded gasoline by 1997.
And this required an investment, obviously, to have cleaner fuel. It's a sort of thing that now nobody questions that it was the right measure to take, but at that time it was indeed questioned by many, whether Mexico could afford it or so on. In fact, that's a wrong way to look at it. Mexico cannot afford not to have a clean environment.
Switching to unleaded fuel produced immediate benefits. Levels of lead in children's blood dropped dramatically. And cars using unleaded fuel could now be fitted with catalytic converters, devices that reduce pollution from car exhaust. Today, only a small percentage of cars in Mexico City operate without catalytic converters. The second measure was to tighten traffic restrictions on motor vehicle traffic. An early program to ease traffic congestion banned all vehicles in the city from driving 1 day each week based on the last digit of the vehicle's license plate. Public transport, police, and emergency vehicles are exempt. This program was copied by most large cities in Latin America, but it's had mixed results.
It was an incentive for people to buy a second, older car. And apparently that happened to a very significant extent. It's now, however, used very effectively to provide incentives for really clean cars, new cars, which have the right emission control devices. They are exempt from this requirement.
Another program enforces engine maintenance standards. A network of official verification centers where each passenger car is inspected twice a year to make sure its emissions do not exceed specified limits.
Because sometimes, you know, the environment, the city is so polluted. These things that the government do, I think they're fine, they're good.
As these qualification levels are tightened, this process is slowly phasing out older, more polluting cars. Cars manufactured in Mexico now conform to the same emission standards required in the United States. The anti-pollution campaign scored other achievements, including shutting down a large oil refinery in the center of the city, reducing the amount of sulfur in fuels, and making public transportation faster and more attractive by improving the subway network and opening high-capacity exclusive bus lanes.
Honestly, about air quality, I think that former authorities 10 years ago, they did a good job because they set these issues in the high priority of the city. And this is not very common in environmental challenges.
The results have been impressive. No more dark clouds of smog that were common in the 1990s, and no more contingencies.
In the last, I will say, 7 or 8 years, we haven't had any single contingency.
But leading public health experts say official levels for declaring a contingency are now far too high. That's why there are so few of them now. For example, the ozone trigger of 200 points against the standard of 100, considered a normal, acceptable limit.
That's way up. That's really high. 160 would be a good number, taking in consideration the amount of growth in the city, taking into consideration, say, how the city is changing.
They say a realistic ozone threshold of 160, 60% above normal, would now trigger 2 or 3 contingencies each year.
Which is a good, say, number, not to frighten politicians about the problem, and it's a good number to keep the public of the city interested in being more responsible in terms of air pollution.
Mexico City is no longer considered the world's most polluted city. According to most studies, The top 10 most polluted urban centers on the planet are now in China. Keeping the public's attention focused on air quality is now a major issue because the pollution today is less visible than it was in the past. It doesn't look as hazardous, but it's still there, especially ozone and small particulates.
They're still quite often above the standard, but not high enough to trigger what we call a contingency in Mexico City, which were very common in past years. So things are slowly improving, and we are now focusing mostly on the small particles because we are aware that from a public health point of view, those are the most damaging ones.
The most damaging, but still unregulated. Great quantities of fine particles are emitted by heavy-duty trucks and buses, which are still not required to be tested at verification centers.
There are filters for diesel engines that remove a very large fraction of these particles. But in a city like Mexico City, only a very small fraction of the buses do have these efficient filters.
For all the progress that's been made so far in cleaning up this city's air, some here say progress has slowed down.
I don't want to say that it is nothing done, but we need to work more and we need to invest more because investments stopped lots of years ago. So this air quality problem needs a second generation of policies in Mexico City.
Most experts agree, and there's wide consensus that there should be 4 major steps in the next phase of reducing air pollution here. First, providing incentives to take old motor vehicles, especially large trucks and buses, off the roads. And then stricter regulations for new vehicles, the same standards as in the United States and Europe.
Mexico City is probably the city where the challenge is largest in the world. So there's no justification to have anything less than the most stringent regulations.
Third, cleaner, low-sulfur fuels. And finally, more investment in public transportation to ease traffic congestion.
We want to spend 3 hours a day in a car. That's what we really want to do with our time? Don't think so.
And that doesn't mean that we are suggesting people not to buy cars or to buy less cars. It's just like in Europe or the US, they can have as many as they want, but use them on the weekends. Just not use them every day to go to work, particularly with just one person.
But there's yet another major step experts agree will be critical to clean air: the Pollutant Release and Transfer Register. Modeled on the US system, it will require every industry to report its toxic emissions, information that will be available to the public.
Really to know what are we breathing, what components are that, if they are toxic or not. So that register is very important.
The Mexican government has committed to making the register mandatory within 2 to 4 years. And this could do more than anything else to bring pressure from the public to reduce air pollution. Cleaner air will have a price, but the cost of living with air pollution in medical care and lost productivity is far more.
It's not something that we wonder whether we can afford to have clean air. No, it actually costs more not to have it.
In their home neighborhood, Daniel and Edgar Resendiz try to avoid extended physical activity outside. Their mother tries anything to protect them from the air they breathe. She knows cleaner air would mean a safer future for her sons. But on the streets and in public parks, the people of Mexico City carry on with their lives, largely untroubled by the toxic compounds they're breathing. Many believe the worst years of air pollution are behind them, and they're not alarmed by what they don't see.
This girl, she had pneumonia, and the other one, she also has pneumonia. It's one of the problems. The risk factor is okay. The risk factor for air pollution, the weather, the viral infections, it could be produce pneumonia in some patients.
There's no question that Mexicans are now breathing cleaner air in their capital city. They still have a long way to go before they reach acceptable air quality. But around the world, there are many cities that could learn from what has already been achieved here. That's our report. I'm Gary Stryker. Thanks for watching.